Hello guys, this is the second video about the spine module, and before we jump and implement in the spine module, I made this video just to clarify certain things I said in the previous one with some visual cue, because I realized that following schematics might not be extremely intuitive. So the graph that I have here is definitely something we are not going to implement. This is something I built temporarily just to illustrate some concepts. So today, again, we're not going to start implementing the spine module, but let me go through this first. So this setup here, we can see that there is a setup event and a forward solve, and it's pretty much the same. I'm computing procedurally the position of the bone of the controls, but we're going to do that properly from the next video forward. And then there is of course the forward solve with the IK spline and the FK spline and the FK solver. Let me jump into it. First of all, I mentioned there is two ways to animate the spine most of the time. One is being using IK spline solver, so an IK kind of solver, where different parts can be animated independently. And then there is the FK solver, which is basically a hierarchical relationship between controls, which drives a hierarchical relationship between bones. So the blue one here, and at the end of the last video I said there is a way to implement IK and FK switching from a kinematic perspective with the controls matching. But I still believe that that's not a good solution, and this is actually happens to be that solution, the not ideal one. And I want to, before jumping into implementing the spine as we discussed, I want to show you why. So let's go through the spline IK first. So you can see that I'm moving the rib cage control, and the middle controls are following along the way. They stay at a certain distance. And this technique, I explained this technique in the video where I'm talking about the transform constraint. It's not implemented with the transfer constraint in here, but it's the same exact thing. So these controls are staying always in the middle. These controls can be selected and moved around to change the curvature of the spine. So you can see that this control here basically solves through the IK spline the position of the spline of the spline joints. Okay, when it comes to the pelvis, if I select the pelvis IK, the pelvis is completely independent from the position of the rib cage. Not this one, sorry, this one is completely independent from the position of the rib cage. Let me reset that for a minute. So this solver here, if the animator were to pose this portion of the body, that portion of the body would stay still, and this can be animated and rotated accordingly to fit whatever silhouette the animator is trying to position. Okay, so you can see that there is a sort of there is no hierarchical information here, in the sense that when I move that, the controls in the middle gets the transformation gets propagated through the controls in the middle, but there is no actual FK hierarchy going above. Now, I position this spine in FK, in IK, and now with this control here that I temporarily put it there, the animator can switch, and the switch happens on the fly, and the controls are matching. The way this is happening is exactly by implementing the follow technique that I've implemented both for the legs and the arms, so there is nothing new there. The difference now is that I can move the IK controls became invisible, and I can now move these controls in an FK manner. Let me reset that for a minute. So an FK chain, we have the first bone, and if I rotate the first control, all the children move with it, and that's pretty much it. This is probably the best way to achieve what I was referring to as C curves and U curves, but actually the proper name is you have a C curve here. So the animator can easily shape this to be a C and then a reverse C. So a really graphic and kind of, you know, a very clean kind of shape we're looking at here. And this is because most of the time FK it's performing on rotation. That not necessarily be the case in this case. Of course, you can move the controls and achieve some sort of squash and stretch. So what we have here is basically a mechanism through this arrow, a mechanism that switches back and forth between IK and FK. And that seems fine. The problem is compared to the arm, where usually the kinematics get decided at the beginning of the shot, and in certain specific instances the animator will change kinematics. On a spine, the amount of range that the spine usually do, especially on an action shot, jumping, flipping around, it's so much that it can be, I think it's a bit more convenient for the animator to have constantly these two type of solver, IK and FK, available without having the switch. So if this is the FK solver, you can imagine that the way we're going to implement it, I was referring to as this technique as the Jason-Schleifer spine. You can imagine that by default you can have this sort of controls, but these controls won't actually move the bones like they're doing here. They will actually move the IK controls, and the IK controls will be the one that are moving the bones, if that can make sense. So this is what we're going to do in the next video. This video here is just a way for me to explain visually a little bit more what I was going through in the previous video. And I think, yeah, the last thing we can discuss about this is always something that needs to be implemented for me. On this one, I have really no doubts. There always needs to be a pelvis control that is completely independent from anything that is happening above. And again, the reason is let's say this FK has been posed here, and the animator is really happy with the shape of this. Of course, you have to imagine that there are legs here. With the shape of this thing, by changing the things above, we really don't want this shape to be changed. So there is true independence between the two. There is an additional thing that I haven't, and we are going to implement it. So please ignore this graph, and you can see that it's huge. This graph is huge because I didn't go through any encapsulation of functions. So it's the rig graph, and this is how it looks just to implement a spine with IK-FK behavior. So you can imagine that, you know, going through this can be a little bit daunting if you're passing this rig onto one of your colleagues. Instead, you know, manipulating functions, atomic functions that perform a very simple set of operation, it can be a little bit more easy to handle. There is an additional feature here that is called secondary FK controls. And if you turn this on, basically these controls exist both in IK and FK solutions. And these are controls that are completely independent from any hierarchy. And what I mean by that is that these are meant to be just adjustments control in case there is a specific need for that shot to achieve something that, you know, it cannot be achieved by using standard kinematics. So these controls here are meant to be, they have literally no relationship between one another, and they will follow the main kinematics. So they will follow either IK or FK, but these can be manipulated and you can shape the silhouette of the geometry exactly the way you want. But these are meant to be only for finessing and fine-tuning the final animation, and hence the name secondary. That's pretty much it for this video. From the next one, we're actually going to start implementing the spine. Cheers!